Hello, this is Professor Werwath. I wanted to do a quick case study on the Motorola ROKR phone. The ROKR was a phone that predated the iPhone by several years. It was a joint venture with Motorola and Apple. It was basically, and some called it an experiment, some called it a joint venture, some called it an education. In many ways, it was an education for Apple into an industry they did not understand, which was the telecom industry and how to build phones, how to get through FCC, how to literally build radios and understand the cellular systems and how they operated. So this case study was largely generated by ChatGPT-4. I have inserted quite a bit of additional information and anecdotes, but for the most part, ChatGPT got most of it correct. So here we go. Once upon a time, Apple wanted to enter the cell phone market, but lacked the experience, the skills, the connections, but most importantly, the supply chain. Motorola had all the skills and connections and supply chain, but lacked the software savvy. Motorola was a hardware company focused on optimizing hardware at the expense of software. Software for Motorola was always underpowered, under-resourced, understaffed, whether you're talking about how much memory, how much MIPS, or how many people were involved. And they had really no software strategy and no software savvy. So Motorola lacked what Apple had. Apple lacked what Motorola had. So obviously this was the perfect marriage, you would say. But I think what you're going to find, as I said in the first slide, it was a rocky marriage at best. It was a short-lived marriage, and the offspring were neglected, to say the least, right? The joint venture was a product called ROKR, R-O-K-R, which was a Motorola product, which is Motorola hardware, a phone from Motorola, integrated with Apple iPod software, right? I think it's important to understand a little bit of the context. Let me give you 2 or 3 slides on the context of what was happening in the roughly 2003 to 2005 timeframe. At the time, the war was raging, right? We had the phone versus the PDA. And in between, we had something called the iPod, which was neither phone nor PDA. The PDA was really focused on the business market. So these were business people keeping track of their contacts, keeping track of their appointments, keeping track of maybe the latest news. But generally speaking, it was very, very limited. What a PDA could do, 20 years ago is nothing in comparison to what a smartphone can do today. On the right-hand side, we see what is going on with the phone. The phone business was dominated by Motorola's Razr, and the original flip Razr is shown on the right. Very popular, very successful phone. And in between, we have this iPod that was introduced roughly in 2001. And the 2001 timeframe had a lot of, divergence, if you will. Apple was introducing the iPod. There was a HP version of it that came from Carly Fiorina. She was licensing the iPod software to put on HP hardware. Ironically, within a year, Hewlett-Packard withdrew from that arrangement because of, quote unquote, onerous terms and conditions. So if HP fell into this trap with Apple, you will soon see that Motorola did as well. So the ROKR phone was introduced by Motorola in late 2005. It was not very well received. You'll see why in a few moments, but obviously the software was lacking because the hardware limitations were too severe, and that came from the terms and conditions of the contract, right? In 2005, Apple introduces a whole new iPod called the Nano, which had over 1,000 songs. The Motorola ROKR had 100 songs. So automatically, the lowest priced Apple iPod outperforms the ROKR by 10x, okay? So automatically, the market's going to react very negatively. Ed Zander of Motorola accuses Apple of undermining the ROKR. This was literally because of the iPod Nano. At the same time, or a few years thereafter, the iPhone and iPod Touch were introduced by Apple. So it seems obvious to me that the 2005 timeframe was a training timeframe for Apple to learn an industry that they knew nothing about, and they catapulted themselves into the iPhone business on the backs of Motorola. So by 2009, all versions and renditions of the ROKR had been canceled, and the joint venture basically terminated. So this is some of the detail provided by ChatGPT. I'm only going to highlight a few things here. For example, in terms of challenges, the limited storage capacity was a major issue. So we can only hold 100 songs in the ROKR. This was not a restriction from Motorola. This was imposed by Apple to make sure that they could differentiate the rocker from the iPod and the iPod Nano, which of course Motorola had no understanding of what this meant. It basically meant that one term and condition in the contract made the entire rocker product obsolete from before it was even designed. Okay, it was killed in almost in vitro, if you will. It was killed in before it was even launched, and it was killed. Ironically, Apple understood exactly what they were doing, and Motorola, I don't think, had a clear understanding at all. These other user experiences, market reception, strategic misalignments, largely come from the fact that Motorola and Apple had divergent goals, right? Motorola wanted to establish itself as the dominant player in this merged product of iPod and phone, and basically a step towards a smartphone. And Apple used it as a training ground so that they could develop their own smartphone and leapfrog over Motorola and frankly everyone else in the industry. The brand reputation, the Rocker's failure damaged Motorola reputation, but at the same time, the Razr was doing so well that most people didn't care that Rocker failed, because Razr was selling like gangbusters. We were selling so many of them in so many different places, so many different versions, flavors, colors, sizes, and materials, that the Rocker failure might have damaged Motorola's reputation, but what ultimately killed it was the introduction of the iPhone. So strategic misalignment, right? Lack of shared vision and goals. Again, Motorola was hardware centered, Apple was software centered. Those two, parts of the world really did not align. And Motorola never really understood the market for music centered phone. In fact, I was told at the time on the street, on the hallways of Motorola, that our customers wanted to talk and listen, period. All this MP3 phone integration was more or less nonsense. They didn't take it seriously. They thought it was mainly for younger users who really wanted to listen to music. In fact, Ed Zander said, as he was criticizing the iPod Nano, who wants to listen to 1,000 songs anyways? So in his mind, there was no market for this. And obviously Apple got that part right. They understood the market, they understood software, they understood how to integrate the two, hardware and software. And because of the relationship with Rocker, they learned how to build a phone and how to get it through FCC and how to set up a supply chain, right? So basically, strategic responses, these are all the things that quote unquote Motorola needed to do in terms of improving its product development processes through better testing. One of the concerns was that, the Rocker was not well tested or well validated before it went to market. And it was rushed. I mean, clearly it was rushed, but proper software testing of this magnitude was never necessary because Motorola never had that much in the way of software functionalities. So this was a whole new level of integration that, frankly, Motorola was not ready for. And of course, market research and understanding what the true market needs are. My 14-year-old daughter, when she discovered the Rocker only had 100 songs, set it aside and said, no, thanks, Dad, I'm not interested, even though I was giving her a prototype and she would be the only one in school. She was in high school at the time. She had no interest in it simply because a 100-song limit was bogus in her mind, right? If it didn't have at least 300 songs, it wouldn't possibly compete with even the cheapest and smallest iPods on the market. So in conclusion, obviously there's a lot of complexities here, right? But I mean, it could be boiled down to one company wanting to learn from another, and it could be boiled down to one company basically not understanding the market, which was Motorola, right? One company limiting the success of the product from the get-go in the terms and conditions, right? And this is an argument that every project and program manager and product manager should understand the intricacies and implications of those terms and conditions, because this is a massive failure. It's the same way that HP couldn't introduce their own version of the iPod a year before. You would think Motorola could have learned from just what HP went through and to make sure that the terms and conditions were favorable to the company, right? Hindsight is always 2020, right? Why didn't HP drop a similar joint venture in 2004? Why was the 100-song limit imposed by Apple? Was this the kiss of death for the project? Was Apple even interested in a successful Rocker? Or was that not an interest of theirs because the Rocker was a Motorola branded product? Was Apple harmed by a failed Motorola phone project? I would argue no. They didn't risk their brand, they didn't risk their reputation, and they learned a whole lot from the process in terms of largely what not to do. Watching Motorola was an exercise in learning what not to do and how to avoid those mistakes. Did Motorola learn anything from ROKR? I guess possibly all the wrong messages, that the smartphone is doomed, right? That they have no business in the smartphone business, and they should let smartphones just stay in the market and die, much the same way today's legacy car companies are abandoning electric vehicles because they see them as quote unquote failures. I would argue a lot of what you see in the market today in electric vehicles was set up to fail, as the current, I guess as this ROKR was designed to fail as well from the Apple perspective, right? Did Apple learn anything from ROKR? Yes, absolutely. How to deal with suppliers, who the suppliers were, how to design and build radios, how to get them through FCC. They learned how to deal with the various carriers, and they learned a lot. In fact, there's a whole video that I put together on how to deal with carriers, what Apple learned from that, and how they were able to dominate in that space. So yeah, that's basically the bottom line. I think the follow-on video, which is talking about the Droid 2 case, while also talks to a great extent as to the business model that Apple learned as a result of working through ROKR. So I think there's a lot to be learned here. So check that one out.